And the first word Dalila Brooks said at the service desk was, "Sorry." Not her mother's name, not the medical record number she'd written on the back of her wrist in blue ink in case her mind blanked. Not the list of failed attempts she'd rehearsed on the L, the 4 phone calls, the 2 emails, the visit last week that ended with the wrong form. Just, "Sorry for catching you while you're busy." The man on the other side of the counter was finishing something on his monitor. Dark hair, quiet posture, a badge clipped to his chest pocket that read, Albert Hahn, Operations Coordinator. He looked up without urgency, the specific look of someone who had already seen enough urgency for one morning. Dalila opened the beige folder. She'd organized it 3 times at home the night before. Reorganized it once on the L, standing, holding the pole with one arm. She started talking. Her mother, Renee Brooks, 54, needed a renewed access badge to enter the rehabilitation wing. The previous badge expired without being reactivated because the system migrated platforms in February. Part of the records hadn't transferred. The insurance had sent the documentation to the old address. The employee responsible for access updates was on medical leave. The exception form Dalila had filled out last week, the one another employee had handed her with full confidence, turned out to be the wrong one entirely. She explained all of this without stopping. Fast, dense, no pauses, because pauses invited interruption, and she'd been interrupted before. Midway through the 3rd sentence, she said, "Sorry, I know this is complicated." At the end of the 5th, she said, "I'm sorry if I'm being confusing." Albert didn't interrupt her. When she finished, he didn't look at the computer immediately. He looked at her for just a second longer, not evaluating, not calculating, simply registering. Then he said, with the dry calm of someone stating a fact, "You're not a problem." Dalila didn't respond. It wasn't the first time someone had been polite to her at a service desk. She'd encountered courteous employees before, some even genuinely warm. But none of them had ever stopped to name what she was doing, as if apologizing for existing there was something that needed to be contradicted out loud. As if her presence had been argued against in a room she hadn't been allowed into, and this was the first ruling in her favor. She gave a small smile, the kind that's slightly embarrassed, the kind that doesn't know what to do with being seen. Albert was already at the keyboard. "Give me her name." This is where it started. No dramatic music. No slow motion. Just a desk in Chicago in March, 2 strangers, and one sentence that would take weeks to fully land. If you've ever stood at a counter, at a threshold of any kind, and apologized before anyone asked you to, this story is for you. Stories like this one only happen because you keep asking for them. If you want more, subscribing is the easiest way to tell us to keep going. Nardi fort. Dalila took the L home with a new form in her hand, the correct one this time. Albert had pulled it from a different system, the one the platform migration had kept intact, and printed it in under 3 minutes while she stood at the desk trying to figure out what to do with her hands. She had thanked him 4 times. She counted later on the train, which is the kind of thing you do when you replay a conversation and realize it was different from the ones before it. He hadn't said, "You're welcome," in the way people say it when they want you to stop thanking them. He'd said, "The form needs a physician's signature. Dr. Ewan handles your mother's case. She'll be in Thursday. I'll leave a note." Dalila had nodded, then said, "Thank you. I'm sorry for the trouble." He had given her a look, brief, measured, and said nothing. Not with exasperation. Not with warmth that crossed a line. Just a look that said, "We already covered this." She thought about that on the train. She thought about it while microwaving the dinner she hadn't had energy to cook properly. She thought about it when she called her mother that night, and Renee asked, in the careful voice she used when she wanted information without demanding it, "How did it go?" "Better," Dalila said. "I have the right form. I go back Thursday." "Did they give you trouble?" "No." A pause. "Actually, no. Someone was patient." Renee was quiet for a moment. "Good. You deserve patient." Dalila changed the subject. She worked as an administrative assistant at a legal aid firm in the Loop, which meant she spent her days processing other people's paperwork with a competence so automatic it had become invisible to her. She was good at anticipating what others needed, less good at naming what she needed herself. Not because she didn't know, but because it had always seemed faster and safer not to. Her mother's situation had begun 6 weeks ago, after a fall that turned out to be less minor than the first doctor suggested. The rehabilitation wing of the medical complex was part of a broader care network covered by Renee's insurance. But coverage and access were different problems solved by different departments running on different systems that did not communicate with each other. Dalila had understood this by day 2, accepted it by day 5. By week 3, she had developed a functional detachment, the same one she used when a client at work arrived with a case that should have been simple and wasn't. Document everything. Follow each thread. Withhold the emotion until the problem is solved. What she hadn't expected was for someone on the other side of the desk to do the same thing. Albert Hahn had opened the correct system, found the specific migration error affecting Renee's file, noted the insurance routing issue, identified which employee was on leave and who was covering the role, and told her exactly what came next. All in a register, so even it should have felt robotic. Except it didn't. He had looked at her at least twice during the explanation, the way someone looks at a person, not a case. She couldn't explain why that difference mattered as much as it did. She didn't try. Thursday arrived with low clouds, and a wind that came off the lake like a decision. Dalila wore the beige coat. She arrived 11 minutes before her lunch break officially started, the earliest she could leave the office without it reading as irresponsibility. Albert was already at the desk. He looked up when she came through the door. There was a post-it on his monitor, yellow, small, a name written on it she could just barely read from a distance. Her mother's name. Doctor. Ewan isn't in today, he said, before she could speak. Family emergency. She'll be back Monday. Dalila stopped. The folder was in her left hand. Her grip on the bag strap tightened without meaning to. 2 fingers. A reflex. Oh. She recalibrated. Okay, I'll come back Monday. I'm sorry. I know this keeps... You don't need to apologize for the doctor's schedule. She almost laughed. She stopped herself, because laughing felt like too much of a response to something that wasn't technically a joke. I'll have everything ready when she's in, he said. You just need to bring the form. She looked at the post-it with her mother's name on it. He'd left it there. He'd been expecting her. She held that thought carefully, like something that might not mean what she wanted it to mean. See you Monday, she said, and walked out without apologizing once. Monday arrived gray and flat, the kind of morning Chicago presents without ceremony. Dalila arrived at the medical complex at 12:40, form in hand, physician's signature obtained, not from Dr. Ewan directly, who had arranged for a colleague to cover her outstanding cases. Dalila had confirmed this at 7 a.m., with a call made from the parking structure near her office, the only place she could have a phone conversation without her coworkers overhearing. She didn't know why she hadn't wanted anyone to overhear. Albert was at the desk, a different post-it on his monitor now. She couldn't read the name on this one, and a coffee to his left that had stopped being hot some time ago. Marcus Webb, building security, was leaning on the far end of the counter talking to Albert about something that made Albert almost smile before he noticed Dalila at the entrance and composed himself. Marcus noticed him notice her. He registered this with the unhurried precision of a man who observes for a living. He excused himself with a nod in Dalila's direction. Monday, Albert said, as a greeting. Monday, she confirmed. She placed the form on the desk. He checked the signature, the date, the authorization code written in the margin. Then he opened the system and cross-referenced Renee's file with the corrected migration data. The same process he'd described on her first visit, running in real time in front of her. She watched him work. His hands were on the keyboard, but his posture didn't shift. Open, still, unhurried. She had worked in offices long enough to recognize the difference between someone performing calm and someone who had genuinely located it inside themselves. He was the second kind. "The system's accepting the update," he said. "The badge will take 48 hours to reactivate through the network. I'm flagging it for priority. Shouldn't take longer than that. Wednesday? Latest? Wednesday at most. Your mother can use a temporary access pass in the meantime." He printed one. It came out small and white with Renee's name and a barcode. He handed it across the desk. She took it, looked at it. "Thank you. Genuinely. I know you've spent a lot of time on this." "That's the work," he said, not dismissively. "As a statement of proportion, this is the job, and the job is worth doing." She was about to nod and leave, 20 minutes left in her lunch break, emails waiting, when he said, without looking up, "Did the form make sense when you filled it out?" "Some of the language is translated poorly from the old system." She thought about it. "The third section. The authorization hierarchy. I wasn't sure if I needed my mother's signature or the physician's." "Just the physician's. The third section is for cases where the patient is incapacitated. The language should be clearer. Someone should tell whoever wrote it." "Someone has," he said. 3 times. She looked at him. He was making a note, dry, not quite resigned. The precise expression of someone who had sent those communications and received nothing back. "You kept a record," she said. "I keep records of everything." Simple answer. But she thought about it walking back to the L through a wind that had picked up since morning. She thought about what it meant to be a person who documented the ways a system failed. Not from cynicism, but because documentation was the only lever available. She recognized that. She did the same thing at her job. She just never considered that someone behind a service desk might be doing it for the same reasons, with the same care. Back at the office, Simone looked at her over the rim of her glasses. "How'd it go?" "Badge is being processed." "You look like you're thinking about something that isn't the badge." Dalila clicked open an email. "I'm thinking about form language." Simone made the face, eyebrow raised, mouth closed, but said nothing. This time. Back at the building, Marcus set a fresh coffee next to Albert's station without comment. Albert was closing the case notes. "She your standing appointment now?" Marcus said. "She has paperwork due Monday." "You knew she was coming, though." A pause. Albert closed the file. "She had a form due today." Marcus sipped his coffee. "Sure," he said, and left it exactly there. Nespermathan. The insurance company's callback window was between 2 and 4 on Wednesday afternoon. Dalila had requested a half-day from work, listed as personal leave, which was technically accurate and deeply incomplete. She sat in the lobby of the medical complex for 2 hours and 14 minutes. The call came at 4:23. In between, she organized her bag twice. She drafted 2 emails on her phone that she didn't send. She watched the elevator doors open and close in the particular rhythm of a building that never truly stopped. The lobby had the quality of all public waiting rooms, the light that flattens everything, the ambient sound of motion without destination, the sense that time here runs at a different rate than outside. Albert was at the desk the entire time. She hadn't meant to make the wait conspicuous. She sat in the row of chairs facing the elevators, to his left, away from the desk. But the building wasn't large, and the afternoon was quiet, and at some point she'd stop pretending to read her phone. "Around 3:15, he said, without looking up. "The queue usually clears on the hour. They may call closer to 4. She looked over. "Do you give all your waiting visitors queue predictions?" "Only the ones who've been here since 2. She let that settle. "Has it been that obvious?" "You reorganized your bag at 2:40. A brief pause. "That's a little unsettling." "It's a quiet afternoon." He looked up. "What are you waiting for?" She explained. The insurance callback, the billing discrepancy, the secondary authorization now required because someone had coded the original claim incorrectly when the platform migrated. A single input error, cascading into a chain of corrections that had already consumed 11 business days. Albert listened the way he listened to everything, without filling gaps. When she finished, he said, "Same February migration? Same update. Different department." He absorbed this. "I can't touch the insurance side. Different system, different jurisdiction entirely." "I know." She said it evenly, because she did. She wasn't here asking him to fix it. "I'm just waiting." A pause. Then, "You're good at that." She gave him a look. "At waiting? At keeping everything inside the lines while you do it?" He returned to his monitor without performance, not ending the conversation, just recalibrating it. Most people in a situation like yours start directing the frustration at whoever happens to be in the room. That seems inefficient. It's human. "I know," she said. And then, because 2 hours in a waiting room had made her honest, "I've been told I make things too tidy, that keeping everything inside the lines stops it from going anywhere." He considered this. "There's a difference between keeping things tidy and being in control. You sound like someone who's thought about that." "I've had time to." He glanced at her, brief, direct. "What did you do with the frustration from the 4 phone calls before you came here the first time?" She looked at him. "How do you know about the 4 phone calls?" "You mentioned them the first day. Fast, in passing. You were listing everything you'd tried." She held still. He'd retained that. From the first visit, in the middle of the explanation she'd given without pausing, he'd kept that detail. "I went for a run," she said finally. "Did it help?" "No, but I felt less dangerous after." He almost smiled, not completely. More the beginning of one, visible only at the edges. "That's control," he said, not calm. The distinction settled somewhere she didn't have language for yet. The insurance call came at 4:23. She answered standing, moved to the far end of the lobby. The conversation lasted 9 minutes and resolved nothing. An escalation had been submitted. Someone would call within 5 business days. She wrote the reference number on the back of a receipt. When she came back to pick up her bag, she said, "Still unresolved." Albert was filling in a form. "The escalation was logged?" "Yes." "That's how it starts moving." She picked up her bag, held the strap with 2 fingers, then caught herself and loosened the grip. "You have a way of making bureaucracy sound like a philosophy." "Someone has to," he said. She laughed. Short, involuntary. The specific sound of someone who'd heard something they needed to hear long before this conversation. She caught herself doing it and felt briefly exposed. He noticed, but he didn't comment on it. She walked out. He went back to the form. He was halfway through it before he realized he'd been holding the same sentence for 30 seconds without writing anything. He wrote the sentence, finished the form, filed it. Marcus appeared at the counter shortly after. "Was that a laugh?" "She has a sense of humor," Albert said. "Uh-huh." Marcus picked up his coffee. "Good thing someone's noticing." Albert looked at the door. "She reorganizes things when she's anxious." Marcus looked at him. "You've been watching long enough to know that." "It's a small lobby," Albert said. "Sure is," Marcus said. He set the coffee down and walked back to his station with the air of someone who had just made a note he was in no rush to share. Mon. 3 days later, the insurance situation escalated in the way escalations always do. Not by growing louder, but by becoming more specific. The billing department had flagged Renee's case for secondary review. 2 scheduled treatment sessions for the following week were now on temporary hold. Not canceled, just paused, pending authorization. The word pending did something to Delilah that 11 previous days of bureaucracy had not managed to do. She appeared at the desk at 12:08 on a Friday. She hadn't eaten lunch. She'd spent the morning running a client intake at work with perfect composure because she had no choice, and then walked 8 blocks to the medical complex in 11 minutes flat. Albert looked up when she came through the door. He read her in less than a second, not with dramatic concern, just with calibration. The way someone takes in weather before stepping outside. "The treatment hold," she said. "I got the notification this morning." I saw it cross my system. He was already at the keyboard. Sit down. She didn't sit. She stood at the desk, coat on, bag in hand. I know this isn't your jurisdiction. I just needed to... Delilah. He said her name for the first time, and it landed differently than she expected. Not as punctuation, not as formality, as a way of making room. Sit down. She sat. In the chair she'd started to think of as hers, to the left, facing the desk at an angle rather than straight on. He worked in silence for 4 minutes. 2 phone calls, both brief, both in the specific register of someone who knows which door to knock on. He took notes. Cross-referenced 2 documents. At the end of the 4th minute, he said, "The hold is a data error. The claim was submitted under the wrong provider code when the insurance information updated. I've flagged the correction to billing and CC'd the case manager. They'll need to reauthorize within 24 hours, but the hold should clear before the first session." A pause. "I also called the rehab wing directly. If the correction doesn't process in time, they're aware of the administrative cause and will note it." She looked at him. "You can access the insurance billing records?" "No, but I can access the internal case file, which shows the provider code discrepancy. The rest is applying pressure to the right desk." He said this without pride, simply like giving directions. It's a solvable problem. It just needed someone to look at both sides of it at once. Delilah sat with the relief, real, immediate, and the thing underneath it that had been accumulating for weeks and had almost broken the surface tonight and was now, just barely, staying contained. She said, "Thank you. I don't have adequate words for this." "You don't need adequate words. This is what I'm here for. But it's..." She stopped herself before saying, "more than your job requires." That felt like diminishing something, and also like an invitation for him to dismiss it, which would let both of them off the hook. She started again. "You remember specifics. You retained the provider code issue from a system you described as a different jurisdiction." He looked at her evenly. "You retained things too. You knew exactly what had been tried, and in what order the first time you walked in. You knew which form was wrong and what the routing error was. You'd already done the work. That's different. That's about my mother. And this," he said with a quiet that held no performance, "is about the person in front of me." She held that carefully. The way you hold something you're not sure you're allowed to keep. Then she stood. She thanked him once. Not 3 times, not 4. Once. She picked up her bag, walked toward the door. At the threshold, she paused. She'd been about to say, "Sorry for taking your Friday afternoon." She stood there for a moment, the almost apology lodged in her throat. And then she didn't say it. She pushed through the revolving door and out into the gray city. Albert watched her leave. Marcus materialized from somewhere near the elevator bank, coffee in hand, the look of a man who had been nearby for a while. "She left without apologizing," he said. "I know." Albert turned back to the monitor. Marcus stood there a moment. "That's new." It was. Albert had clocked it the second she went through the door. He said nothing. Went back to the case file. That evening, in the break room of the legal aid office, Simone Carter found Delilah standing in front of the coffee machine making nothing. Just standing there, coat still on, bag still on her shoulder, staring at the buttons. "You've been there for 4 minutes," Simone said. Delilah pressed the button for dark roast. "I know." Simone poured the last of the regular and leaned against the counter with the patience of someone who would wait as long as the truth needed to arrive. "The insurance hold got resolved," Delilah said. "I figured, you're here, not at the building." Albert sorted it. He found a provider code discrepancy through the internal case file and applied pressure to the right department. 2 phone calls. 4 minutes. Simone looked at her. "Albert. The operations coordinator at the building. The one whose visitor log badge you found in my bag last week." Simone had found it in the zippered pocket when they were looking for a pen at lunch. Delilah had unzipped the wrong compartment. It was a laminated copy Albert had given her as documentation for her employer, proof of appointments in case anyone questioned the leave requests. "I didn't drop it," Dalila said preemptively. "I know. I said I found it." Simone sat down. "How many of your last 11 visits were about the badge, and how many were because the insurance situation spiraled?" A pause. "Most were legitimately." "How many, Dalila?" Honest count. 7 related to the badge case, 4 for the insurance. "And the afternoon the insurance callback was pending, you went there to wait for it. It was a central. How many times did you reorganize your bag while you were there?" Silence. Simone made the face. The eyebrow, the closed mouth, the very specific quality of patience that meant, "I'll wait." Dalila looked at her coffee. "He's attentive. He's competent. That's notable because most people I've encountered in that system have been polite and completely useless." "Both things can be true at the same time," Simone said. "What does that mean?" "It means he can be exceptional at his job and you can be responding to something that has nothing to do with his job." She picked up her coffee. "When was the last time someone looked at you like you were worth paying attention to? Not as a client's daughter. Not as the person who holds everything together for everyone else. Just as you." Dalila said nothing. "He called you by your name," Simone said quietly. "You mentioned it to me like it was something, and you don't mention things unless they are." This was accurate, and Dalila resented it precisely because of that. "He's kind," she said carefully. "But he's kind to everyone who comes through that door. That's the job. I have no way of knowing if he even—" "I'm not talking about what he feels," Simone said. "I'm talking about what you feel, because you're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you pre-argue yourself out of something so you never have to take the risk of actually wanting it. You're building the case against it before you've even let it land." A pause. "You're talking like someone who's already decided she doesn't deserve it." The break room was quiet. The coffee machine hummed. Dalila said, "I don't think I don't deserve it." "Then what do you call apologizing before you've been blamed? What do you call not finishing sentences when someone's actually listening?" Simone gestured at her. "You came back from somewhere, and you're still there, standing in front of a coffee machine with your coat on, 4 minutes later." Dalila didn't answer. She was still there. That part was true. She was still in that lobby, in the relief that was also something else, in the sound of him saying her name without using it as a period at the end of a transaction. She was there, and she didn't entirely know how to get back. "It's not simple," she said finally. "No," Simone agreed. "It usually isn't, when it's real." Dalila finished her coffee, put the cup in the sink, picked up her bag. "Mom's badge process is Wednesday," she said. "Okay." Simone watched her. "What happens after Wednesday?" The question stayed in the room long after Dalila left. She didn't have an answer. What she had was a feeling she'd been filing under gratitude for 2 weeks, and which had started to take up too much space under that label. The badge cleared Wednesday, as predicted. Renee Brooks walked into the rehabilitation wing at 9 a.m. with full access, and a temporary visitor packet that the intake staff took from her with routine ease. Dalila watched from the hallway window, through the glass, because family members weren't admitted past the second checkpoint before 10 a.m. on treatment days. She called Albert at noon. She hadn't planned to. She had his direct extension. He'd given it on the 3rd visit. Use the extension. The main line takes 20 minutes. And she'd saved it in her phone under Building Head Operations, which she now recognized as an elaborate story she'd been telling herself. The call lasted 4 minutes. She thanked him. He confirmed everything had processed correctly with the wing staff. There was a pause. Not awkward, but suspended. The kind that happens when a conversation has reached its official endpoint, and neither party moves. "Cases usually don't close this cleanly," he said. "You made it clean." The documentation was solid from the start. She recognized what he was doing, redistributing credit, and chose not to argue with it. "Are you done at 5 today?" A brief silence. Yes. There's a place on the corner. Yura. A pause. I'd like to say thank you outside of a service context. She caught the pre-apology before it formed. If you want. Another pause. Shorter. 5:15, he said. Yura was small, warm, cardamom and dark wood. Dalila arrived first, inevitable, and chose a table against the wall. Albert arrived at 5:17, meaning he'd stayed 2 minutes past the end of his shift to close something properly. She would have wagered on it. He sat down. Out of context, without the charcoal shirt and badge and the surface of the desk between them, he looked the same, but different. More present. She noticed his hands, placed flat on the table the same way he held them at the counter. They ordered. They talked. Easily, the way conversations run between two competent people who have already established a baseline of honesty. She told him about the legal aid firm, the intake process, the particular satisfaction of resolving something that seemed impossible on paper. He listened without competing, without offering advice that hadn't been requested. She asked about his work. He described it with the same measured quality he brought to everything. The systems, the gaps, the ongoing record of those gaps. 3 years at the building. Before that, a similar role at a city administration office. Do you like it? She asked. He considered the question as though it deserved consideration. I like when something that shouldn't work does, because someone paid attention, and when it doesn't. I document it and wait for the next opportunity. She smiled at that. He noticed. What do you do when you get home? She asked. The question landed differently than she'd planned, or exactly as she'd meant it, which was what gave it weight. It was asking about what existed for him outside the function. He paused. Nothing, he said. Usually nothing. The sadness in it was new. Not performed, not dramatized. The specific sadness of someone who had just answered honestly and surprised themselves doing it. He said it in the same even register he used for everything, but this time the evenness was a surface over something deeper, and she could see straight through it. She didn't fill the silence with comfort. She let it sit. I go for runs, she said after a moment. After hard days. I don't love the quiet when I stop, but it helps. Control, not calm, he said. Maybe. She looked at him. Have you been calm, doing nothing? He looked down at his hands on the table, then back up. No, he said. She held his gaze for a second longer than the conversation required. Then he glanced toward the counter and said, Do you want another coffee? He had retreated. Gently, precisely, without drama. He'd simply closed the door he'd cracked open. She saw it happen. She let him close it, because forcing a door was not the same as someone choosing to open it themselves. Sure, she said. He went to order. She watched his back at the counter. The stillness of him, the careful way he stood even in a cafe, and thought about a man who kept everything quiet on the surface and called it living. The next morning, Marcus was waiting with 2 coffees. He handed one to Albert without being asked. Standard. Then he leaned on the counter with the posture of a man who had an opening prepared and was in no rush to use it. How was Yura? He said. Albert took the coffee. Fine. Fine. Marcus nodded. Coffee was good? Decent. She get there first? A pause. Albert looked at him. How do you know I had coffee with anyone? I don't, Marcus said pleasantly. But I do now. He settled in. I'm not here to lecture you. I'm noting, as your friend, that you've been different in this building for the past month. Less mechanical, more present. Like someone turned on a light in a room that's been dark for a while. He sipped his coffee. I've worked with you 2 years. I've seen you handle a cardiac emergency in this lobby with less visible response than you had when she walked through the door last Monday. Albert said nothing. I'm not saying that's a problem, Marcus continued. I'm saying it's information. And I think you're working very hard not to do anything with it, because you've spent a long time being useful to people without being... He searched for the word. Actual. That's an overstatement. Is it? Marcus looked at him. Who calls you when they have a bad day? Silence. Right, Marcus said. And who comes to you when they have one? Albert didn't answer that with words. The answer was everyone. He had a reputation in the building, the person you found when the system failed, when the department didn't answer, when the form was wrong and you didn't know where to turn. 3 years of being that had built a quiet authority he valued because it was useful. Marcus was asking about the inverse, about the half of the exchange Albert had quietly removed from the equation, so gradually he hadn't noticed the subtraction. He'd grown up between 2 definitions of restraint. His mother, Sunyi, had managed a public office for 11 years. Her version of competence was invisible by design, a service so smooth the people receiving it forgot to wonder what it cost her. He had absorbed this, then refined it into a method. He looked at the small photo stuck to his monitor. His mother, younger, at a desk not unlike this one. She'd retired and gone back to Korea for a year to rest. Before she left, she'd said something he hadn't fully processed until recently. I gave everything to the work, because I didn't know what to do with the energy otherwise. That isn't the same as having given it to the right place. She asked what I do when I get home, he said. Marcus waited. I told her nothing. That's true. I know it's true. He set his coffee down. She didn't try to fix it. She just answered honestly about herself and let it go. A pause. And then I ordered more coffee because I didn't know how to stay in the conversation. Marcus absorbed this with the patience of a man who had witnessed many partial confessions. So you left. I changed the subject. Albert. That is leaving. He didn't argue. The thing about her, Marcus said, quieter now, is that she's not asking you to save her. She's been navigating that system for 6 weeks without saving. She's asking you, by showing up, by the way she looks at you, to just be there, not to fix anything, just to be actual. He picked up his coffee. You know how to be there for people. You just haven't done it for yourself in a long time. Albert looked at the desk, at his hands on the counter, open, the way they always were. He'd stopped letting people pass the counter long ago. Not because it was a rule. He could step out from behind it any time. He'd done it 100 times to help someone with a heavy bag, to direct a lost visitor, to manage something that needed his physical presence. But there was a difference between crossing the desk to be useful and crossing it to be seen. He hadn't done the second in a long time. He'd learned somewhere along the way to make the desk the boundary. Everything he gave from behind it. Information, attention, time, the kind of steadiness that people leaned on and forgot to question. He was good at it, good enough that it had stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like a fact about him, the way certain habits calcify into identity without announcing themselves. Dalila had walked in 6 weeks ago and apologized to him before he'd asked her anything. And instead of processing it as the ordinary reflex of a stressed person at a service desk, something in him had stilled, had registered it, had contradicted it out loud before he'd consciously decided to. He wasn't sure what that meant, but Marcus was right that it meant something. 10 days, Marcus said. That's my estimate for when the pretext runs out and she stops coming. Albert looked at him. What are you going to do? Marcus said. He didn't answer that morning, but he was still thinking about it in the afternoon, when the lobby was quiet and the elevator doors opened and closed without her. She came back on a Thursday. There was no case still open, no documentation pending, no appointment requiring her presence. She came because she found herself near the building on the way back from a city records office downtown, which was true. And because she had decided to stop inventing reasons for herself. She walked in at 2 p.m. Albert looked up. His expression didn't change, but it did something. That shift she'd learned to read. The one that moved in his eyes before his face committed to anything. No paperwork, she said. I see that. She sat down in the chair to the left. I wanted to ask you something. He waited. The other night at Yura, You said you do nothing when you get home. And then I let it go because you changed the subject and I didn't want to push. She looked at him directly. I'm asking now, not for any official reason. He was still for a moment. What are you asking exactly? What would calm look like for you? Not control. Not the version of you that makes sure forms are filed and the system doesn't fail someone. The other version. The lobby was half empty. Someone reading near the elevator. A man in a visitor badge checking his phone. Neither paying attention to the desk. Albert said, I'm not sure that version has been given enough time to develop. Because you've been too busy being the first version. It's not a complaint. The work matters. I'm not suggesting it doesn't. She held his gaze. I'm asking what you wanted before helping became the thing you did with wanting. This was the most direct she'd ever been. She felt it, the slight exposure of saying a true thing plainly, without the buffer of apology or softening. She stayed in it. He looked at her for a moment. Then, I wanted to take a long trip. I've had a map for 6 years. Different cities, different routes depending on how much time I had. A pause. I've never gone. What stopped you? Nothing dramatic. The work was always there. A case was always open. The department was always short-staffed. He said it without bitterness, as fact. I'm good at justifying staying. You're good at making staying sound like virtue. He looked at her, not with offense, with recognition. She'd found the exact seam. My mother used to say, Dalila said more quietly, that you don't get credit for sacrifices no one asked you to make. She paused. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Mostly about myself. But I think it applies broadly. He was quiet. Then, she sounds like someone who's thought about it too. She had to. She raised me and I picked up everything from her. A beat. Including the apologies. Something in him settled. Not relaxed exactly, but landed. The way something sits when it's been in the air too long. My mother worked a desk like this one, he said. 11 years. She was extraordinary at it. Invisible in the way exceptional service always is. You only notice it when it stops. He glanced at the photo on his monitor. I thought I was following her lead, being useful in a way that had its own dignity. And now? He looked back at Dalila. Now I think I may have inherited the form without asking what it cost her. The lobby's ambient sound filled in around the silence. Dalila didn't rush past it. Then she said, I think you should take the trip. Not next year, whenever it becomes possible. And I think when you get home, you should let it be loud sometimes. Not nothing. Something. She stood. He didn't move, but his attention followed her. You came for no reason, he said. I came for a good reason, she said. Just not an official one. She walked toward the door. Halfway there, she stopped. Turned back. The map, she said. Paper or digital? He paused. Paper. From a travel bookstore that doesn't exist anymore. She nodded slowly. Like something had just made sense that hadn't before. Good, she said. And left. He sat with the empty lobby and the photo on his monitor, and the fact that she had asked him who he was when he stopped being useful, and stayed for the answer. He hadn't expected that. More than that. He hadn't expected to answer. He pulled the map from the desk drawer. Opened it the way you open something that's been folded in the same creases for too long. The paper soft at the edges, pencil roots faded but still legible. He looked at it for a full minute. The routes he'd traced years ago. The cities that had changed and the ones that hadn't. The version of himself who had drawn those lines. Then he folded it back. Put it away. Not with resignation. With something closer to intention. Simone called at 8:15 on a Tuesday. Your mom's second stage coverage, the reauthorization. Dalila was on her feet before the sentence finished. What happened? She told me to tell you not to panic. Simone. It's approved. But there's a paper addendum that has to be physically signed by the attending physician and submitted before Friday, or the authorization resets. A pause. It was in her portal. She checked it tonight. She didn't call you directly because, her words, you'd already been doing too much. Dalila had her coat on before she consciously decided to put it on. I'll go to the building in the morning. The physician's available tomorrow only between 8 and 10. Conference after that. I'll be there at 8. Dalila, it's... Simone hesitated. It's 9 p.m. I know. She opened her laptop anyway, read the addendum, 15 lines, straightforward, physician's credentials, a case reference number she already had. Not complicated. She could handle it at 8 a.m. without any preparation that needed to happen tonight. She sat there anyway, in the coat, at the kitchen table, with the laptop open. Her hands were flat on the table surface. Open. Still. She thought, absurdly, of Albert's hands at the desk. She picked up her phone and called the building's main line, which she knew went to the overnight staff. When the night desk answered, she asked to leave a message for Albert Hahn for the morning, that Dalila Brooks would be in at 8 a.m. with documentation for the Brooks case, and could he have the file ready. She hung up. Sat for another minute. She was running on the specific fuel of necessity, the kind made entirely from what has to be done when everything else is spent. She went to bed at 10:30. She didn't sleep well. She was at the building at 7:54. Albert was already at the desk. The case file open. The message had gotten through. He looked up when she came through the door. He read her, stripped down to function, running on very little. The precise look of a machine that has been going too long without maintenance. You didn't need to come this early, he said. Physician's window closes at 10. She placed the form on the desk. I have the case reference number. He processed the form. Made a call confirming the physician's availability. Set the documentation in order. Printed the supplementary cover sheet. He worked without unnecessary conversation, which was what the situation required, and she was grateful for it. When the last sheet came off the printer, she said, You should have been off 2 hours ago. I had a 7:30. He looked up. You should eat something. I had coffee. That's not food. Thank you for the diagnosis. He looked at her. Not with lecture. Not with performance. Steadily. Then he stood from his chair, came around from behind the desk, to her side of the counter. She looked at him standing beside her, in the same space, not across a surface from her. The form is ready, he said. The physician gets in at 8:15. You have time. A pause. Dalila, look at me. She did. You don't need to apologize every time life feels heavy, he said. Not to me. Not to anyone in this building. Not to your mother's care team. And then, more quietly, not to yourself. Something in her chest went very still. The kind of still that comes just before something gives. I know, she said. And because he was standing close enough and quiet enough for honesty to be the only thing in the space between them, I just don't know how to stop. He didn't tell her it was easy. He didn't offer a method or a fix. He said, You'll learn. You've already started. She looked at him for a moment longer than the conversation required. Then she straightened, picked up the form and the cover sheet, held the bag strap with one finger, not two, almost loose. Thank you, she said. Nothing behind it. No modifier, no apology attached to the back of it. She went to find the physician. Albert stepped back behind the desk. But the invisible line on the floor, the one separating the service space from the public space, had been crossed. They both knew it now. Thursday, 11:45 a.m. The permanent badge was done. It was a small card, blue-gray laminate, Renee's name in standard print, a barcode coded to the second checkpoint. Standard issue. Unremarkable to anyone who processed 40 of them in a week. Albert had it on the desk when Dalila came through the door. He watched her scan the counter before she looked at him. Habit, by now, reading the desk the way you read a room. She saw the badge. She walked to the counter. She picked it up. "It's active," she said. "Full access. No expiration date on the current plan." He walked through the paperwork. Copy for her records, copy for the physician file, copy for the wing intake desk. Clean, complete, nothing outstanding. She signed where required. She did it without apologizing. He noticed. When the last form was done, the specific silence of a finished task settled between them. "That's everything," he said. "That's everything," she agreed. She looked at the badge in her hand. 6 weeks. 11 visits, not counting the afternoons waiting in the lobby, the phone call at noon, the Thursday she came in with nothing to file, and sat in the chair to his left and asked him who he was without the function. "I want to say something," she said. He waited. "I came back here more times than I needed to. Toward the end, at least." She met his eyes. "I had real reasons every time. But I also wanted to come. After a while, those were different things." And she had said this to herself in various arrangements for weeks, and saying it out loud was stranger than she'd expected. Not bad strange. Just exposed. He was quiet. Then, "I knew when the badge case would resolve. 2 weeks ago, the timeline was clear." He said it with his characteristic evenness. "I didn't accelerate it. I told myself it was because you had the right to know each step as it happened. A beat. Also because I didn't want the timeline to be the end of you coming here." She looked at him. That was the most direct he'd been. More direct than, "You're not a problem," which had named what she was doing. This named what he wanted. And Albert Hahn said true things in the same register as facts, without drama, without performance, simply because they were true, and evasion had a cost he wasn't willing to pay. She should have responded. She had something ready. Instead, what happened was this. She looked at him standing at the desk, hands open on the counter, and felt the last 6 weeks settle into something that no longer felt like a problem to be managed. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it. No modifier. No apology trailing behind it. Just 2 words with nothing hidden." He nodded. "Take care of her." "I will." She put the badge in her bag, picked it up, held the strap for a moment, and then she let go. The bag hung loose from her shoulder, unsecured. She walked out. Albert looked at the door after it completed its revolution. Marcus arrived from somewhere he was never expected, set a coffee next to the station. "Done?" he said. "Case closed," Albert said. Marcus watched the revolving door. "You told her." "I told her something." "And she left." "She left." A silence. Marcus picked up his own coffee. "So?" "So," Albert said. The lobby continued its ordinary motion. Albert returned to the desk. It was a fine Thursday in late March. The city outside was gray and brisk. Delilah walked to the L with the badge in her bag, and the bag loose on her shoulder, and a feeling she couldn't immediately name. Relief was in it, and something heavier, and something that might have been the beginning of fear. Because the pretext was gone, and she didn't know what to do with wanting something she now had no official reason to pursue. She spent 1 day not knowing, then 9 more. Albert noted the days. Not on paper. He wasn't given to that kind of record-keeping for personal things. He noted them the way you register the absence of something that had quietly become part of the texture of a day without you deciding it would. Day 1. She was at work, with her mother. Tired. All of these were likely. Day 3. He had no reasonable expectation. She owed him nothing. The case was archived. Day 5. Marcus left a coffee at noon without comment. The specific version of concern Marcus expressed when he didn't want to discuss it yet. Day 7. Albert took the paper map out of his desk drawer. Not to plan anything, just to look at it. It was from 1998, from a travel bookstore on State Street that had closed the year he started college. His mother had bought it when he was 12, presented not as a gift, but as a practical object. Here, for the trip you'll take when you know where you want to go. He had told Delilah it was from a bookstore that no longer existed. He hadn't told her his mother bought it. He hadn't told her because the conversation was already running deep, and he'd ordered coffee to stop it going deeper. He refolded the map. Put it back. Day 9. Marcus sat at the desk during a quiet stretch and said, "You did something right. The morning you came around the counter." She needed to hear something. She heard it. She left. "You did the right thing. At the desk." Marcus looked at him. "What are you going to do outside of it?" Albert said. She retreated. "She's not coming back. So go find her." "I don't have a reason to." Marcus held the same patient expression he used when someone had missed something obvious right in front of them. "Albert, that woman spent 6 weeks in this building apologizing for taking up space. Then she stopped. Then she told you she came back because she wanted to, not because she had to. And then you told her you didn't want the timeline to be the end of it." He spread his hands. "She's not gone. She's waiting to see what you do with that. Same as you are." Day 10, 7:43 a.m. Albert arrived at the building, opened the system. Looked at Renee Brooks's file, closed, archived, complete. He sat there for 8 minutes. Then he opened the notes function on his computer, the one he never used for anything personal, and printed a post-it. He wrote 2 things: the name of the coffee shop on the corner, a time, 12:15, no name on it, no signature. He set it on the desk in the spot where he kept active case notes. Then he picked up his phone and called her cell, not the building extension. She answered on the second ring. "It's Albert," he said. A beat. "I know. I have a post-it on my desk with a time and a place." A pause. "That sounds like a very Albert way to ask someone to get coffee." "It is." A pause. "I should have asked sooner. I'm asking now." A longer pause. He held the line, open, still. She said, "I have a lunch break at noon. 12:15 works." "Okay." Something shifted in the weight of her silence. A real decision, made quietly. "Albert." "Yes." "I'm going to show up without apologizing for being there." He looked at the post-it on his desk. He looked at the photo on his monitor. His mother young, at a desk not unlike this one. He thought about what she'd said before she retired, about giving everything to the form of a thing instead of its source. "Good," he said, and meant it completely. He hung up, stood, walked around the desk, past the counter, past the line on the floor, and went to stand in the lobby. Just there, on the public side, without a task that required it. Marcus arrived at 7:58 with 2 coffees, saw Albert standing in the middle of the lobby, and stopped. "Finally," he said. Albert took the coffee. Looked at the revolving door. "She's not here for 4 hours," Marcus observed. "I know." He said it simply. "I just wanted to see what it felt like to stand here without a reason." Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. Went back to his station. Albert stood in the lobby. The door revolved. People moved through in the ordinary rhythm of a building going about its morning. He stood in it, not resolving anything, not useful to anyone. Just present. It felt, for the first time in a long time, like enough. If you've ever been afraid that letting someone in would cost more than staying alone, this moment is for you. Keep going. She arrived at 12:12, 3 minutes early. She came through the revolving door without the beige coat. March in Chicago was still cold enough to justify one, but she wasn't wearing it. She had the bag on her shoulder, loose, the strap hanging free. Albert saw her the moment she came through the door. She walked to the counter. She didn't apologize for being early. She didn't apologize for the 10 days between their last conversation and this one. She arrived the way someone arrives when they have decided to take up the space they're standing in. "Ready?" she said. He stepped out from behind the desk. Not for a task. Not to redirect anyone or manage something the situation required. He stepped out because she was there, and he wanted to be in the same space. They walked out together. Outside, Chicago was doing what it always did in late March, performing its cold with the indifferent confidence of a city that has never needed to be liked. Wind off the lake, damp pavement, people moving at the pace of people who are somewhere they need to be. They walked to the corner, ordered coffee, sat in the warmth of Yura, and this time when the conversation found depth, neither of them changed the subject. She asked about the map. He described it in full. The cities, the routes, the version of the trip that had updated in his imagination every few years as his life changed around it without him. She listened the way he always listened to her, without filling the gaps. He asked about her mother. She told him the real version, not the functional summary. Renee's humor, the navy scarf she always wore in the hospital chair, the way she offered something first whenever she needed something herself, an old habit she'd passed down without intending to. She told me something last week, Dalila said. She said, "You spent 6 weeks fighting for my access. Let someone fight a little for yours." Albert looked at her across the table. "She's right," he said. Dalila smiled, small, real, the kind that required no management. She thought about Renee in that hospital chair, the navy scarf, the still dignified posture, the way she'd delivered that sentence like a woman who had been waiting for the right moment to say it. Renee, who had survived everything by offering something before asking for anything, who had passed that same reflex to her daughter without knowing it, and who had apparently spent some time understanding exactly what she'd done. The weight of that, of being loved by someone who was also willing to name the cost of how they'd loved you, was not simple. It was the kind of thing that asked something back. Dalila had walked into that building in March with a beige folder and a defense script, and the practiced posture of someone who expects to be a problem. She had said, "sorry," before a single question was asked. She had apologized for the doctor's schedule, for existing in the lobby, for having a need that required more than one visit. And Albert Hahn, who knew the difference between control and calm, who kept records of things that mattered, who had a map from a bookstore that no longer existed, and a trip he hadn't yet taken, had looked at her and said simply, "You're not a problem." Most true things take time to land. This one had taken weeks. She was here now. Not because the form required another signature. Not because the system had failed again. She was here because she had decided that taking up space, his space, her own, the space of a life that had room for both of them, was not the same as being a burden. She'd learned the difference. Slowly, with resistance, the way real learning always goes. He had made the same decision on day 10, standing in the lobby at 7:58 with a coffee, and no function to justify being there. Just standing in it. Just present. They walked back to the building after. She waited in the lobby while he finished the afternoon. In the chair to the left, facing the elevator bank at an angle, a book open in her lap. When he came through the lobby door at the end of the shift, he found her there. He stopped. She looked up. "You were counting," she said. "The bag strap." She looked down at her hand. One finger on the strap, barely. She loosened it. Old habit. "I know," he said. "I noticed it the first day." She looked at him. "And now?" He held the door open. Waited. She stood. She left the bag loose on her shoulder. She walked through the door he held. The city received them without ceremony. No slow motion, no borrowed music. Just Chicago in March, indifferent and enormous, and two people walking into it together. Neither of them apologized for any of it. The best part wasn't the ending. It was everything that had to happen before they got there. If you stayed until now, you know exactly why.